Okay, so we are going to discuss the process for a bill becoming a law. First, you have to know who can propose a law. Anyone in the United States is allowed to suggest an idea for a law, but only a member of the House of Representatives or the Senate can actually take a proposed law to Congress and suggest it on the floor of the House or the Senate. So how does this process get started? We're going to start this illustration with the House of Representatives, but it also begins in a very similar manner in the Senate. Almost exactly the same, with a couple of differences that we'll talk about. So a member of the House of Representatives writes a bill, usually with the help of their staff and perhaps some interest groups. And they submit the bill to the House of Representatives. And in the House, they read the bill before an open session of the House, and they take the bill and drop it in a big wooden box at the front called the hopper. Then the Speaker of the House, with the majority party leader, assigns the bill a number that begins with HR in the House or S for Senate. Then the Speaker of the House and the majority party leader work together and assign the bill to committee. Once the bill is assigned to a committee, it's sent there. There are several permanent committees, also referred to as standing committees. These standing committees have a specific subject area or topic: education, health and human services, agriculture, science, transportation. They have similar committees in both the House and the Senate, and these standing committees are where the Speaker of the House sends the bill that's proposed first. The committee chair, who is usually a member of the majority party, assigns the bill to an appropriate subcommittee. So you have the Health and Human Services Committee, the committee that deals with infectious disease or other issues related to health. They're all broken down. Those aren't specific examples, but you get the idea. They take Health and Human Services and they break it down into smaller committees. In subcommittee hearings, the subcommittee holds hearings about the topic of the bill. It allows people the opportunity, public, citizens, interest group members, politicians, experts, anybody with an opinion on this bill that cares can come and testify before the subcommittee either for or against the bill, or they can propose amendments to the bill. And as each amendment is suggested, then it's voted on, and it either is added to the bill or that change is made, or it's ignored and the proposed change is voted down. Ultimately, the subcommittee, after holding hearings, making amendments, they can decide to write an entirely new bill. And then once they've constructed whatever bill they want or change the bill however they best see fit, then the subcommittee votes as to whether or not they should send the bill back to the full committee for consideration. This is one of the first of many opportunities for a piece of legislation in the national legislature to die. So if the subcommittee holds hearings, rewrites the bill, makes amendments, changes it, and then they don't vote to send it back to the full committee, the bill dies. Once a bill comes out of subcommittee, it is then presented to the full committee, the full permanent standing committee. It is also placed on an agenda by the committee chair, and so it can come out of subcommittee, let's say, in 2 weeks, but maybe it's not considered for another 3 months. It depends on the committee chair's determination as to how important this proposed piece of legislation is. And this is another example of how in the House of Representatives might makes right. And so after consideration, any amendments are changed. The full standing committee can also hear expert witness testimony in support or against the bill. After they hear this whole process, the full committee votes on whether or not to send the bill back to the House, as we're using the House of Representatives as our example. A large number of proposed pieces of legislation in both the House and the Senate never make it out of committee. They die there, and if that bill's topic is to be reintroduced, it has to happen in the next legislative session. For the bills that do actually pass the full committee, then it's the responsibility of the full committee to write a report that gives sort of a summary of the bill, whatever changes they've made from the original author's proposed bill, how the bill compares with current laws, and why they think this bill is necessary for the people of the United States. The bill and the report are then sent back to the full House. When the bill returns to the floor, the whole House or the whole Senate for consideration in the House of Representatives, the majority party and the Speaker of the House place the bill on the calendar for the House of Representatives until it's scheduled for discussion. The House and the Senate have very different rules for the debating the bill, and it is another opportunity for the majority party to either help fast track a bill's passage in the House or delay it or kill it altogether. So, when the bill is up for consideration in the House, before the debate begins on any bill, it is first must pass through the Rules Committee. The Rules Committee only exists in the House of Representatives because there are such a large number of representatives in the House. So the Rules Committee sets the limit on debate. Members can speak usually 1 to 5 minutes. The first member who wrote the bill or who is very supportive of the bill will speak for 1 to 5 minutes, and then you have someone who is against the bill. One of the functions of the House Rules Committee is they can set all of the rules for debate. So the Rules Committee can set the number of speakers who are able to speak, either supporting the bill or criticizing the bill who are against it, the number of amendments that can be made, what can be the content of the amendments, do the amendments have to pertain to the content of the bill, can they be any kind of amendments, how many amendments could be made, are there any amendments allowed on this bill. And so basically, the more rules that are placed regarding amending, changing, the number of speakers who can participate in this process really influences or makes it harder for a particular piece of legislation to get passed. So once members of the House of Representatives have satisfied that they've discussed the proposed piece of legislation as much as they want, all it takes is a simple majority vote to end discussion on the bill, and then any amendments that they want to make, if the Rules Committee allows amendments to be made for the bill, they can be suggested, debated, voted on, and finally, once all of that amending or changing the bill is finished, then the House votes on the bill, whether they pass it or it's killed. If the bill does not pass, then it's dead and would have to be reintroduced in the next legislative session as a different bill, even if it's the same content. It has to be given a new title or the same title, but add the new year to the title. And it has to be proposed once again and go through committee and all of the same process that we've discussed. For those rare bills that do actually make it from the House of Representatives, it is then sent directly to the Senate. Okay, so the Senate is, in the Constitution, said to be chaired by the Vice President of the United States, but in modern U.S. political life, the Vice President is rarely ever actually in that chamber, which is why the honorary position of the President pro tem of the Senate was created, because that person is the longest serving member in the Senate of the majority party. The President pro tem used to spend a lot more time chairing the Senate, but now it's often handed off to freshman senators or first-year senators, first-term senators. In the Senate, because there are only 100 senators and there's equal representation, and also by design of the founders of the Constitution, there are a lot more opportunities for senators to have influence on legislation, proposed legislation that they're considering. And so there is no Rules Committee in the Senate. Debate is open. It is much less structured than it is in the House. So there's no time limits for debate. There's no prior rules about whether or not people could add amendments. Members can speak as long as they choose. This is where the Senate has the opportunity to use a filibuster. A filibuster is simply where a senator speaks until there's no longer a quorum or enough senators present to conduct official business in the Senate. Amendments can be added at any time, and once all of the debate is over, the bill is put to a vote. It's also very important to note that the initial process for proposing a piece of legislation in the Senate is the same as the House of Representatives. So when a senator proposes a bill, They turn that bill in to the Senate leadership, and the majority party leader, who has to have a little bit more influence from the minority party leader, assign the bill to committee, and then it goes through the same process of the standing committees to subcommittees in the Senate as it does in the House. And then if it makes it out of committee, it goes to debate on the Senate floor. So we finally have two similar versions of the same bill from the House and the Senate. Before a bill can be sent to the president for his signature or his veto, there has to be a conference committee, because a bill cannot be sent to the president from either house unless the House bill of the Affordable Health Care Act and the Senate bill of Affordable Health Care Act were identical. And this is done through a process called conference committee. Okay, so the whole function of a conference committee is to take two similar bills from the House and the Senate and turn them into the same bill. Conference committees are created every time there are two different bills over very similar topics that are passed in the House and the Senate. There aren't permanent members of a conference committee, because the conference committee only lasts as long as it takes the members of that committee from the House and the Senate to come up with a similar or an identical bill that they send back to both houses to get voted on. So members of the House and the Senate are appointed to join the conference committee. The conference committee looks at the version of the bill from the House and the version of the bill from the Senate. They compare the differences, and then they rewrite that piece of legislation to make it identical in both the House and the Senate. Their whole role is to try to write a version of the bill that's identical that they believe will get passed in both the House or the Senate, because, yet again, if, after the conference committee rewrites a bill, they send it back to both houses to be voted on by a simple majority in the House and the Senate, and one of those two legislative bodies does not approve the conference committee bill, the bill dies. So this is another opportunity for the bill to be killed. So the conference committee rewrites a new bill, and then they send a report back to their House and the Senate and say, this is how we worked out the difference between the two bills. This is our compromise, essentially. Okay, so the conference committee report with the rewritten bill is sent back to the House, and then if the House passes the bill, it's sent to the Senate. If the Senate or the House does not pass the bill, it dies. There's another opportunity to kill a bill. If it passes in both the House and the Senate, it is finally sent to the president for his signature. Once the president has the bill, he has four choices, or she, maybe one day in the future. The president can sign the bill into law. The president can allow a bill to become law without signature. If a bill sits on the president's desk unaddressed and he doesn't veto it and Congress is still in session at the end of those 10 days, then the bill becomes law. Why would a president do this? Maybe a law is kind of controversial and he doesn't want to be associated with the bill, but he also doesn't want to be associated with vetoing the bill. It's a way to allow something to happen without having to necessarily be a contributor to it. And the president can veto the bill, which the only way that vetoed bill could become law is if both houses of Congress then have a 2/3 majority in both houses override of that presidential veto. It could still become a law. And then finally, the president can use the pocket veto. And the pocket veto can only be used at very specific times in the year or during a legislative session. If, after 10 days, the president has not signed a bill and Congress is no longer in session, the bill does not become law. So there are very few times when the president actually has the opportunity to use the pocket veto. Similar reasons, a president would use the pocket veto as to the same reason why the president would allow a bill to become a law without signature. Okay, so to finish up, here's a legislative flowchart that just shows you a graphic representation of all the steps that I've just discussed. Okay, so we see introduction of the bill, the speaker assigns it to committee, the committee chair assigns it to subcommittee, we get out of the committee, it goes to the rules committee, goes onto the floor of the House for consideration and debate. If the bill does not die in the House, it is then sent to the Senate, where it's introduced by a member of the Senate, the president pro tem, essentially. Also the vice president, but president pro tem, assigns the bill to the committee. Committee chair assigns it to subcommittee. We get out of subcommittee and committee, goes to the majority leader, puts it on the calendar, goes to the floor for debate. Miraculously, the bill gets out of both houses. It has to go to conference committee, somehow gets out of conference committee and goes back to the floor of the House and the Senate, where they actually vote, both houses vote and pass the bill, and it's sent to the president. And there you have it. The bill goes